How does April 3rd, 1968, a marriage founded through hope, Stranger Things, the show, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and smartphones all come together, and how in 20 years will they predict peace in the Middle East? You ready for this? Stay with me till the end. I promise you, it'll blow your mind. So how do they all fit together? Let me start with this journey of Sweethearts and Heroes. Almost 15 years ago, we started Sweethearts and Heroes, and it was very shortly after that I met one of the world's hope experts, Rick Yarish. Came into my life. I found myself talking to young people at the end of speeches. Whatever I was saying was affecting them in such a way that they wanted to hang out and talk to me. And what kids wanted to talk to me about was this feeling of hopelessness. And, I've always been able to give great advice. I was raised in an environment where I was around people that had this feeling of hopelessness, but I've never felt it. So when you sit there and you talk to a young person and tears are streaming down their face and they're in an empty auditorium and they're talking to you about this feeling of hopelessness, what I realized was I really didn't know what to say. Certainly could give good advice from my perspective, from my past, from my life, but I don't know what that feeling is like. In comes into my life one of the world's hope experts, Rick Yarish. When I meet Rick, I know he's the answer because he's been there. He's been to this place of hopelessness, something that I hope I never experience. And I knew he was the answer. And when I learned from him that hope comes from and through other people, that we all have hope inside of us that we could give to other people, that became part of the solution, these sweethearts, these carriers of hope, to this issue of hopelessness. Now, the other thing when I met Rick, he said to me that getting blown up was the best thing that ever happened to him. And, inside, I'm shaking my head thinking, it's a fascinating comment, right? But inside, in my head and in my heart, I'm thinking, nope, you have to say that you don't have any other choice. Like, it's just the way it is. You can either accept it, or you can battle it. And Rick, for some reason, had the ability to accept it. And I think it was because he recognized that he had received hope from other people when he was at his lowest. He has this one fascinating concept. He was so hopeless, he couldn't even end his own life because he's like strapped into a bed. So think about that for a second, how hopeless that is. You're so hopeless, you can't even end your own life. So I meet Rick Yarish. He makes this fascinating comment to me, and at the same time, I'm trying to come up with this answer for kids that are struggling, and I'm thinking this is the answer, this is the solution. So Martin Luther King Day is coming up, 1968, April 3rd. Martin Luther King gives this speech, and everybody knows the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech, and many people know this speech. The April 3rd, he was assassinated on April 4th, the next day. But he makes some really, really fascinating comments in this speech, right? And it's the mountaintop speech. We've all heard it. I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He makes these incredible, incredible statements. And there's some other really fascinating statements. And if you haven't listened to the clip, you should. He says, because I've been to the mountaintop, he says, like anyone, I want to live a long life, which is really fascinating because, he's assassinated the next day. He says people are concerned, he said, but I'm not concerned about that now, living a long life. He goes, I just want to do God's will, right? Crazy. He also says that God, after he makes that comment about God doing God's will, he goes, God has allowed me to go up the mountain and to look over, and I've seen the promised land. Like, these are like cultural echoes that society has just gobbled up, right? Like they're just iconic lines. And, he kind of steals a bit from Moses, right? He says that I may not get there with you. How right he was on that one. Like Moses never made it to the promised land, right? He goes, that we as a people will get to this promised land. He said, I'm not fearing any man, which again, I turn into, I'm not fearing hopelessness. He says, my eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. So you have this iconic thing that builds this feeling in all of us that these people are going to be liberated and freed because Martin Luther King has seen the promised land. And to a certain extent, this relationship with Rick, and, I battle myself from saying this out loud, but I have seen the promised land. through this relationship with Rick, because let me go back now to, when Rick first said that to me, that getting blown up was the best thing that ever happened to him, I thought, no, Disney World is the best thing that's happened to someone. But then my eyes have seen it. Like I first started seeing the little nuggets of it when kids would gravitate to him, tell him their story, this feeling of hopelessness that he shares with kids that I really can never share. I've never been blown up, metaphorically, spiritually, emotionally, physically, but so many kids have just been blown up another way, whether it's divorce, whether it's watching their parents go through unimaginable challenges, their family members, themselves, abuse, neglect, worse. And, these are just create this explosion. It's like the Big Bang it's like this explosion that just creates this hopelessness that's almost unescapable, right? Like a black hole, it just sucks someone in. It's this negative vortex, this spiral. I find the solution. I get over my own hurdle of, no, you have to say that. Because the best example, years into this, I'm in New Hampshire. He gets brought in with his aide. He's sitting on the edge of the bleachers, just a little elementary guy. He's got a big birthmark on his face. It's the cutest thing I've ever seen. It's Rick's doing his speech. He's walking back and forth. And this little guy, every time Rick walks by, it's like he's cutting a tractor beam. And this little kid tries to stand up and his aide pulls him down. And pulls him down. And I'm just sitting on the side watching. It was just so cute, right? Like this little guy wanted to touch Rick because he knows and has met someone that finally understands what he's feeling on the inside. The speech is over. I snap a picture of this kid touching Rick. It's one of my favorite pictures ever. I go on this tear and telling everybody in my life that I'm traveling with one of the world's hope experts, my wife, my kids, my friends, anybody, strangers. And I'm just telling them all these stories. And Rick is right when he says, even if I could get it all back, my ears, my nose, my legs, I wouldn't do it. Because I'd have to take back all that hope I've given to other people and it wouldn't be worth it. I just wouldn't do it. Blows my mind. I'm living, I'm selling, I'm peddling hope to everybody. Hold on, possibilities exist. It doesn't matter what you're going through. The possibilities that exist for your future are there. Don't give up. But there's this little thing inside me just gnawing away because every Friday I get to rush home as fast as I can. I get to see my family for one day, get back in the car on Sunday, go to the next school. And this little thing's gnawing at me on the inside that here's this guy peddling this thing called hope. Hold on, possibilities exist. How lonely is he? And my heart ached over this. And I'm thinking he's going home to sit on his couch with his dog. Sure, he sees his parents, his brothers, his, stuff like that. But, I'm thinking, are we just selling snake oil to kids? Are we just selling them an empty box? It sounds great from the outside, from this person that doesn't understand hopelessness. It sounds great. It's like magical. It gives you goosebumps when you see it and you're like, whoa, that's the answer. Hope. But this was gnawing at me. And then we go to Colorado. We do this business thing. Rick gets an early flight, take him to the airport, drop him off. Guys don't, my generation, we don't talk about these things, right? These feelings. I certainly knew he thought about those kind of things because I was thinking about them, but you don't talk about them. We're in the car, I'm dropping him off. And at some point he must have had the courage to make himself vulnerable. And he just lays it on me. And I'm like, I love when Rick tells a story because I don't even remember this, but I guess what I said was, thanks for sharing. And then he gets out of the car. And I guess he thought I was going to say something magical. I didn't know what to say. Like, hold on, possibilities exist, buddy. There's someone out there. That was the moment I was like, this isn't real. It's a bunch of words that sound good. It's like watching a movie. You get that feeling. It's not real. I think in my heart, I stopped believing it. Now, I was on a track to build this, to push it out there. It certainly made people feel a little better, like a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. But I think in my heart, I stopped believing it. What was I going to say to Rick? Yeah, the possibilities exist. But who in the heck wants to wake up next to that? I love saying that in big teacher things we do. And teachers are like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that. Well, dude, you're thinking the same thing. We all have been trained like love is on the inside until you look like Rick, right? Because you got to meet someone first. And no matter how nice they are, like anyway, I just, and I feel weird saying that, but it's just the truth. That's what I was feeling. And I tried to talk myself out of it, but like I knew he wasn't going to find anybody. And then he meets Amy. And I have this beautiful picture of him and Amy, and she's gorgeous. I love saying she's as pretty on the inside as she is on the outside. And they find each other. Like that was the moment I knew hope was real. No matter what you're going through, no matter how you've been blown up, hold on. Possibilities exist for your future. Like it's game over. Like that was when I was sold. Shortly after that, I left my career, 4 kids, made a bunch of money, had a great career, left it. 15, 16 years in the industry, unemployed myself, no insurance, boom, gone. Didn't know I was going to open up a connection a little bit to the railroad industry after that, but I just left it all. I just like, this is real. I was just committed to it, burned my boat. Like, that's it. No other option. It's real. On a side note, Rick wanted to have a baby and they tried, found out that he was the issue, couldn't do it. And it's funny, man, because I freaking hammered him. Hold on, possibilities exist. No matter what he said. Oh, yeah, it's easy for you to say. You've got kids. Very shortly after that, he gets Grace. And this is another concept that's just blown my mind because we all think that having a biological child is the ultimate, the crowning jewel, but it's not. I said this to Rick recently over the last 6 months. I said, if you could have your own biological child, but you had to get rid of Grace, would you do it? And you thought I'd have punched him square in the face. Like, how could I ask such a dumb question, right? Just like biology has nothing to do with love. Like it just has nothing to do with it. But it's so funny because I hammered the world's hope expert, right? With this notion that, hold on, possibilities exist, baby. Like that just, I can feel the joy just swell in my heart when I say that. And it doesn't matter what you're going through. I will say this could be the best thing. This is the best thing that's ever happened to you, no matter what the tragedy is, the loss of a child. I certainly would not say that that's a good thing, but good can come from it or through it. It's so hard because you can't see it. I didn't see any of it. That's the first piece, 1968, this Martin Luther King speech. I have seen the promised land. I've been to the mountaintop. I'm certainly not comparing myself to King, but I've seen it with my own eyes in my own way that hope is the answer and that we all have hope inside of us that we can give to other people if we choose to. That's the solution. It's the answer. That's number one. Let me come to Stranger Things now. I am a huge believer in, and I've become a believer in this. It's so easy to allow our generational narcissism or awareness to get in the way. And I learned this through 13 Reasons Why. I don't watch TV much. I will watch some shows with my wife. She enjoys that kind of thing, but I'm just not a TV watcher. I'm not like, oh, I can't wait to watch this new series. This is the lesson I learned from 13 Reasons because I started to talk to adults about it and they say, I don't agree with that show, sensationalizing this stuff. And I say, well, I don't either, but I want to have common language with students that are watching it. And I just really grew that area in my own life. It's like when I play Will You Be My Sweetheart, I always say, if you secretly listen to Ice Spice, I like saying that to middle schoolers. And the teachers are all like, Ice Spice, what's that? I'm like, don't listen to it. Anyway, so I try and really jump into their stuff. Anyway, I had no desire to watch the Stranger Things. I see this generation, they all wear the shirts in schools. And in Costa Rica, I see a kid wearing a Stranger Things shirt. I'm like, dang, I got to watch this thing. So I go on this journey to watch these 4 seasons. I believe it's 4 seasons. I go on this journey and I'm a bit of a weirdo sometimes. I'll even take some notes in the movie theater. Like I got to shield my phone because I'm like, oh, wow, that was a great concept. So I go on this journey to watch this crazy show. I had no desire to, but I start watching it. A couple things. I think my favorite part, was in season 4, episode 7. Don't quote me on that, but it's when Eddie, who might be one of my favorite characters, and Steve connect with each other. They're on this walk and you have these 2 opposing worldviews, right? You've got this metalhead, D&D, weirdo. Everybody knows that kid, right? Weak, not very courageous, knows it himself, poverty, just a completely different worldview archetype. And then you got Steve, right? Quintessential jock, handsome, gets the ladies, whatever he wants, drives a BMW, everything. They come together. It's like the Breakfast Club, but you can't talk about the Breakfast Club to this generation because they don't understand it, right? But it's the same exact concept. That was my favorite part of the whole series, I believe, is when these two worldviews come together and they find peace for a common thread, which is the fighting of evil or hopelessness, because the whole show is about hopelessness. But here's the beauty of the show that just blew my mind. 15 years we've been working on this message of sweethearts and heroes, but it's been about one thing. It's been about empowering young people to be the change. And when I first started watching the movie, and even as I got into it more and more, most of the adults look like idiots, right? And I was like, I don't know if we should do that. I don't know. Like, and even at the, towards the end when they have the big town hall, one of the cops looks like a real moron. Even then the parents get together. I'm thinking, it's not realistic. But it is so realistic, right? Because the kids have to be the change. I saw this little clip that Elon Musk did, and he said, this guy was interviewing him and said, we think we can extend life to 150 years or something crazy. Classic Elon fashion. He kind of stutters around a little bit in classic Elon fashion. He's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And the guy's like, why? We're going to go to Mars and all this stuff. And he's like, well, people don't change their mind. He said they just need to get old and die. And can you imagine having Trump for 100 years or having Biden for 100 years? Like, it would be a disaster, right? They nail it in this show. The superpowers, not just L or 11, but all the kids have superpowers. And this is exactly what Weinman talks about. When you create an intergroup, especially they start pulling in all these other kids. The kid comes from California, but they all have different superpowers, every one of them. Right? Dustin is this nerdy thing. His girlfriend in Utah, she's part of it. They all have different superpowers. And once they know each other's superpowers, they can lean on each other to get them through. And there's just tons of moments in this show where they pull each other through this hopelessness. Oh man, there's just so many thoughts about it that were just brilliant. And it's the Sweethearts and Heroes message. It's about giving hope. It's about taking action. It's about fighting this hopelessness, this evil of hopelessness. And make no mistake about it, it's evil, hopelessness. That's kind of the brilliance of this show and this generation right now that really is the answer to hopelessness. They're in the midst of it. We've got to empower them, give them the tools to fight this war on hopelessness. And make no mistake about it, it's a war, right? Suicides have tripled in 10 to 14 or 30% of young women across this country have seriously considered ending their own lives. Make no mistake about it, it's a war against hopelessness. The kids are the answer, the solution. They prove it in the show that they're the ones that have to fight this battle. Our job is to support them. So there you go. So I got 1968, right? This King's speech, seeing the promised land, the mountaintop. We're not going to make it there, period. 20 years, I'll be old and I just won't see the promised land. It's just not going to happen in my lifetime. I got this marriage established from and through hope that got me to see this promised land of hope and of action. I see this show, Stranger Things, and it just so reinforces with me that these kids are the solution to this issue of hopelessness. Like, period. Exclamation point. That's it. Right? And by the end now, waiting for season 5, I'm like, what are these kids going to do now? And the maturation of them was incredible too, right? Like the facial structural change in these kids. It's like, wow, they're maturing. Yeah, they were little toolboxes, all of them in the beginning. And now they're becoming these real life superheroes that are saving the world. Okay, on to the Palestinian conflict. So I have spent, when October 7th happened, I don't know why the universe pulled me into Twitter Spaces. I say that to kids now, and they're like, it's X, it's not Twitter. Like, yeah, okay, buddy, thanks. Pulls me into this X Spaces. And I literally now have spent hundreds of hours listening to this Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I'm sitting from my perspective, from my generation, listening. It's exactly what I anticipated. Vitriolic, hostile, challenging. But I listened to this one guy, his name is Nelson Apega, and he's a bit crude, but what I like about Nelson is no matter what he believes, he leans more on the Israeli side. He's a black guy from Nigeria, educated in England, lives in the U.S. now. What's interesting about him is no matter what he believes, he lets an Israeli talk and a Palestinian talk. Israeli, Palestinian. He'll go on for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And I just listen to it in the background. I never speak because one of the things that has been robbed from our children, I don't know if they're going to fix this. Logic is built through the ear gates, right? That's how it's built. Things come in, our brain processes, we create the image up here. This generation has been hijacked. We've come in through the back door of imagination, Instagram, TikTok, images, and we flood their brain with images. We don't allow them to build the image themselves. So that's a big problem. But this social audio is interesting because it's doing what humans have done and are supposed to do to build logic. And that's one of the great problems with our young people is they don't have this building of logic the way humans have for thousands and thousands of years. But with the rise of social audio, you just have to listen. And so as there's this reverting back to the building of good, solid logic, which the laws of logic are unchanging. If human beings are gone, we would still have the laws of logic. If the humanity was gone, the laws of logic would still exist. It's like the law of gravity, right? I'm on Twitter Spaces listening, just learning for myself. What's really going on over there? Who's right? Who's wrong? It hits me because I'm listening one day and some guys talking. I don't even remember the context of the conversation, but a kid in the background who's listening jumps in and says something. And the man, the father, whatever he was, hushes the kid. It just hits me. Again, I've seen the promised land. I'm piecing all this stuff together. My subconscious is bringing it together. What I realized in that very moment was these intergroups that have been in place for thousands of years. The Israelis get together and they talk about their perspective with their group, with their children. Their children get to listen to it. They get programmed. And they're right. The Palestinians go to their homes. They talk to their kids. They program their kids. And now you've got these two closed networks that never overlap with each other. I mean, maybe rarely, but essentially you've got two separate groups of people. And King understood this. Martin Luther King understood this, that they never come together and listen to each other. It's one of the beauties of Circle. And I think this is what has produced this ability in my brain. As limited as it is, it's what produced it in my brain. What you have now, because of this right here, this thing, this phone, which we think is evil, and there are certainly components of evil and destruction, and we look at the studies and what it's doing to the kids' brains and distraction and all this other stuff, the rising of anxiety and comparing and all this other stuff that's happening with it. But we should not miss the fact that for the first time in human history, now somebody could always pick up a book and read someone's perspective, but we're going to have two groups of people on both sides of this conflict. And we're doing what humans have always done. We're at each other's throats. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. And for the first time in history, we have little brains and minds, consciousness, that are listening to both sides of the story, both sides of the conflict. For the first time in history, they're listening to both sides. When they take over in 20 years, this is why I won't be around for it, or I won't be very useful at that point. But I really believe with all my heart that these kids that are children right now are listening to the hopelessness and the tragedy and the bloodshed and the despair and the fear and all of that. They're listening to the other side, and they're listening to it from and through the heart of a child. A child is not born angry and frustrated. A child's state is peace and harmony. It's play. It's fun. It's enjoyment. A little black boy and a little black girl can come together. A little Israeli boy and a little Palestinian boy can come together on a playground, and they can enjoy each other, and they can have fun with each other, and they can be in peace. And then we ruin that, right? But we have a generation that are listening, building that sense of logic in their brains and coming together, and they don't realize it yet. So that when they take over and they take the baton from us, from this carnage and destruction that we've created, I really believe in my heart that it will produce peace in the Middle East because of the hope that these kids have inside of them and the action that they eventually will be able to take and to change the world once we get out of the way and stop screwing everything up. So if I go back to the beginning here, April 3rd, 1968, King says he's been to the mountaintop. He's seen the promised land. I began to see it through this message of hope that Rick Yarish, the gift that he gave me, right? The gift that the universe gave to him, his wife, Amy, that I didn't ever think. I thought it was impossible for Rick to find that. I see this Stranger Things. It just reinforces the message that we're giving that this is the answer. Like, kids are the answer. Our job is to allow them to do this. Yeah, we have to have this moral foundation, which is a slippery slope, because my moral foundation is different than yours, perhaps. But there are common threads of that foundation that we can share. You see what's going on in Palestine, which is really fascinating to me, or in Israel. You know, I found myself just, it's not Palestine, it's Israel. Okay. But you see what's happening there. That is truly the promised land, right? According to so many belief structures. And then you got this thing that comes onto the scene that we want to vilify. And there are problems with this. But if you pull those things together and you allow students to be the answer, be the solution, we could have peace in the Middle East in 20 years.